The woman who attended every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering. The woman who had baked cakes for Daniel and Ryan when they were children. The woman who always seemed slightly uncomfortable whenever family history came up. The woman who had never married. Never had children, or at least that's what everyone believed. Daniel looked back at the adoption paperwork, then at the photograph, then back at the paperwork again. His hands trembled. No, this couldn't be real. He turned the page, and there it was. A birth certificate. Mother's name, Sarah Mitchell, his aunt, Ryan's biological mother. Daniel felt like the floor had vanished beneath him. For 39 years, Ryan had believed Linda was his mother. For 39 years, Daniel had believed Ryan was his brother. But Ryan wasn't Linda's son. Ryan was Sarah's son, his cousin, not his brother. Suddenly, dozens of childhood memories made sense. The strange looks, the awkward silences, the family arguments that abruptly stopped whenever children entered the room. Secrets had surrounded them their entire lives, and now they were finally surfacing. Daniel carefully gathered every document, every letter, every photograph. Then he left. He needed answers, real answers, and there was only one person who could provide them. Sarah. The next morning, Daniel drove 3 hours to a small coastal town where Sarah lived. Rain clouds hung low over the highway. His thoughts raced endlessly. What would he say? How could he even begin this conversation? By the time he arrived, his stomach felt tied in knots. Sarah lived in a modest cottage overlooking the water. Nothing extravagant, nothing that suggested decades of hidden secrets. Daniel knocked. A minute later, the door opened. Sarah smiled, then her smile vanished, because she immediately saw the look on his face. Daniel, he held up the photograph. Color drained from her face instantly. She knew, without a single word. She knew. Can I come in? Sarah looked like she might faint, but eventually she nodded and stepped aside. An hour later, they sat across from each other in her living room. The adoption records lay between them. Neither had touched their coffee. Sarah stared at the documents. Then tears began sliding down her cheeks. For several moments, she couldn't speak. Finally, she whispered, "I always wondered if you'd find out." Daniel swallowed hard. "Tell me everything." Sarah nodded. Then she began. And the truth was even more heartbreaking than Daniel imagined. 39 years earlier, Sarah had been 19, young, scared, pregnant. The father disappeared before Ryan was born. She had no money, no support, no way to care for a child. Linda and Thomas had recently married, unable to have children of their own. At least that's what doctors believed at the time. So they offered a solution. They would adopt Ryan, raise him as their own. Keep the truth secret. Sarah agreed, not because she wanted to, because she felt she had no choice. Tears streamed down her face. "I thought he would have a better life." Daniel remained silent. Sarah continued. Then came the next shock. 1 year later, Linda unexpectedly became pregnant. With Daniel. Only Daniel wasn't Thomas's biological son. Michael Reynolds was. Sarah revealed everything. The affair, the secret agreement, the trust fund, the lies. All of it. Every hidden piece finally fit together. But Daniel still had one question. The most important question. What happened to my trust? Sarah closed her eyes. Pain crossed her face, because she already knew. They stole it. Daniel's chest tightened. Sarah nodded. Your father found out about the trust after Michael died. Daniel clenched his fists. Thomas? Yes. Sarah looked devastated. He became obsessed with the money. She explained how Thomas spent years convincing Linda they deserved it, that they had raised Daniel, provided for him, sacrificed for him. Eventually, they hired lawyers, manipulated paperwork, moved assets, and transferred control. The process took years, but they succeeded. Daniel sat silently, listening, hurting, understanding. Every sacrifice he'd made, every mortgage payment, every delayed dream, had been built on a lie. 3 weeks later, Daniel confronted his parents. This time there were no restaurants, no celebrations, no audiences, just truth, raw and unavoidable. He laid every document across their dining room table. The letter, the adoption records, the trust documents, everything. Neither parent denied any of it, not a single page, not a single fact. For nearly an hour, nobody spoke. Finally, Thomas broke the silence. "We did what we thought was best." Daniel stared at him. "Best for who?" No answer, because there wasn't one. Linda cried quietly. But Daniel noticed something important. She wasn't crying because she'd been caught. She was crying because she finally understood what she'd lost. Her son. The son who had spent 12 years helping them. The son who never asked for anything. The son they betrayed. The legal battle that followed lasted almost 18 months. It was brutal, expensive, exhausting, but the evidence was overwhelming. The hidden documents, the trust records, the letters, the financial trail. Piece by piece, the truth emerged. And eventually, the court ruled. Not entirely in Daniel's favor, but enough. Enough to prove what had happened, enough to recover a substantial portion of what had been taken, enough to expose decades of deception. The money helped, but it wasn't what mattered most. Because during the investigation, another victim emerged. Ryan. When Ryan learned the truth, his world shattered. He discovered Linda wasn't his mother. Thomas wasn't his father. His inheritance was built on stolen money. His entire identity had been constructed from lies. For months, he refused to speak to anyone, including Daniel. But eventually, something unexpected happened. Ryan reached out. Not with excuses, not with anger, with an apology, a genuine one. For the first time in their lives, they talked honestly. No family myths. No secrets, no favoritism, just truth. Ryan admitted he'd always suspected something was wrong. He just never imagined the reality. Neither had Daniel. Slowly, the relationship healed. Not as brothers, but as family. Real family. The kind built on honesty rather than manipulation. The people who suffered most were Thomas and Linda, because when the lies disappeared, so did the illusion they had spent decades protecting. Friends learned the truth. Relatives learned the truth. Most painful of all, their children learned the truth. Trust vanished, and trust is much harder to rebuild than money. Years later, Daniel still visited occasionally. Not because everything was forgiven. Some wounds never completely heal. But because carrying hatred forever only creates new prisons. He chose peace. Not for them. For himself. One autumn afternoon, Daniel stood on the porch of his own home. A home fully paid for. A home where his wife Emily laughed with their children in the backyard. A home built on truth. Not secrets. Not stolen promises. Not manipulation. As the sun began to set, Emily joined him. She squeezed his hand. "You okay?" Daniel smiled, and for the first time in years, the smile felt genuine. Yeah, because he finally understood something important. The inheritance had never been the greatest thing stolen from him. Trust was, and unlike money, trust can never be replaced, but it can teach you who truly belongs in your life. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we trust the deepest. Loyalty is a beautiful thing, but loyalty without honesty becomes exploitation. Never confuse sacrifice with obligation, and never allow guilt to replace self-respect. Money can be recovered, property can be replaced, and secrets can eventually be exposed, but time is the one thing nobody gets back. Value yourself enough to recognize when love is genuine and when it is being used against you. In the end, truth may take years to surface, but it always finds its way into the light.